Good afternoon, everybody. Well, first of all, I'd just like to say that it's been, well, perhaps I should explain where I come from. How many of you know a little bit about the European Commission? I know we're not terribly popular these days, but, so, okay. I work in the Commission Department for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. And I'm in charge of a unit that deals with, is trying to help promote social enterprises and their developments across Europe. We work with other Commission departments, we work very closely, but that's kind of part of what I do. As I have to rush off after this, I'm going to also just say a few words about the event and some general reflections. Although I was asked more specifically to talk about why the European Union is supporting social enterprises. But first of all, I'd like to thank the organisers. It's been a great day out for me. I don't often get this kind of opportunity, but it's really nice to go to a conference, to meet practitioners, to meet academics, to have time to reflect intellectually. One thing I really like about the approach in this project is the multidisciplinarity. This is something that I'm convinced of the value of interdisciplinarity. I've been in this job for about a year, so I'm still a newcomer. But in my assignment before starting this one, I was doing some work on education for innovation. And one of the things that really emerged there is that innovation happens at the intersections of disciplines. It's by challenging ideas, etc. Personally, I also think it leads to more informed and more intelligent policy making. I think we need to understand history, psychology, economics, politics, all these things together. And I think that's fundamental to open-mindedness and to making proper evidence-based policy. And I really like the fact also that you're engaging with practitioners, social enterprises, and policymakers because, of course, it's better if academia is relevant to the real world. And as policymakers, we really need evidence-based policy making, and the European Commission is actually, despite what people might read in the papers here, we're very committed to evidence-based policy making. And just on the whole social innovation question, I found the presentation by Johanna fascinating and the other observations. I'd say that innovation is something we as well at the Commission are very keen on, economic and social innovation. I'd say I'm not leading the Commission's work on social innovation per se, but we do have a prize, a European Union prize for social innovation since 2013, and where there's a social innovation community. There's also there's going to be next year a new social innovation challenge platform that's going to be launched, which is going to try to get social enterprises and to work with mainstream SMEs to try to solve social problems. As far as my remit is more around promoting social enterprises in general, and I'd say that we're rather agnostic around the whole question of social innovation. As far as we're concerned, if a social enterprise is helping to promote a social good, that's fine. We see that a lot of the time when we talk about scaling, it's also about replicating an idea that exists already, which may not be innovation per se, but that has a tremendous value as well. So that's just a small reflection on social innovation. So I'd say it's important, but it's not everything either. So any social idea, as far as we're concerned, merits being scaled or replicated or expanded. So I was asked to speak more specifically about the importance of social enterprises for the EU. I'll explain why we're supporting social enterprises and what we're doing now in three main areas. The first being access to finance, the second being around helping member states to improve the framework conditions in which social enterprises operate, and finally a word on access to markets. Now, so why are we? Our support to social enterprises, I'd say, had a big bang in 2011 when the European Commission adopted the Social Business Initiative, which is it's a policy paper saying we're going to do a range of things in three areas. The first was the visibility and recognition of social enterprises to make them, raise their profile among policymakers legal forms, trigger legal forms that are adapted to them. The other was around the funding issues, addressing access to finance, and the other was around the regulatory framework, public procurement, state aid, things like that. So why did the Commission get interested? Obviously, it comes a few years after the financial crisis, but it was a growing realization of a shift in values in society, people's motivations changing, but also realizing that these enterprises can make a tremendous contribution to jobs and growth and inclusive growth. We know there's still very high unemployment. It's 50% of young people in some countries. We really desperately need to find new sources of employment and locally rooted jobs. And we see, in fact, we have some figures now that show that some very impressive growth rates for social enterprises in the period 2008 to 2014. For example, our mapping study that we've just updated shows that in Belgium, it was about, in the last few years, employment has grown by about 11% in Belgium, and in the Brussels area by 25%, and in Italy by 20%, while jobs in other mainstream companies have declined. So there's some really promising indications, and we know it's already, and the social economy is already a significant employer for some time. But we think the importance of this area these kind of companies will only grow with the demographic changes we're facing, the aging population, growing social problems that need solving, sustainable development, the need to find sustainable solutions and new products and services. Of course, technological challenges. And as I said, the fact that we sense there is a value shift that is occurring, that a lot more people are interested in becoming social entrepreneurs. And I was at a conference in November in Paris, and a speaker, one of the keynote speakers, said that apparently this year from Stanford Business School, 20% of the graduates want to become social entrepreneurs compared to 1% last year, which, okay, it's an anecdote, but it's if it's true, that's promising. So various reasons. So the reasons we're interested in social enterprise are very similar to the ones that were outlined here earlier. So the Commission adopted the Social Business Initiative in 2011, and then we had this new Commission led by President Juncker, took office at the end of 2014. So last year we started to have a number of calls by other European Union institutions or bodies calling on us for this Commission to make a visible statement, also a political statement in favour of social enterprises and the social economy. So the European Parliament, the European Economic and Social Committee, the Committee of Regions. We also had the SBI also set up an expert group of national experts on social enterprises called the GECES, for those of you in the know, and they adopted a report in October which calls on the Commission to have a new action plan for social enterprises, and they make recommendations in 13 areas. So there's starting to be quite a strong impetus for this Commission to also be explicit on the issue. And I'd say there have, however, been two important developments recently at the level of the European Commission. Now, the first is that in the summer, some of you may have heard of the investment plan. It's sometimes called the Juncker investment plan, or the formal name is the European Fund for Strategic Investment. It was this 315 billion fund that was talked about some time ago. But in any case, the key thing is that we're getting a significant investment onto our tools, onto our instruments for microfinance and social enterprises from this new fund. So the EU has, for the period 2014 to 2020, the Employment and Social Innovation Programme. And as part of that programme, we have 193 million euros for the 7 years for microfinance and social enterprise. But with this additional investment from this new investment plan, that will bring that figure up to 1 billion euros. Also because of the co-investments it will trigger from the European Investment Bank Group and from the European Investment Fund. And that in turn will enable us to leverage an additional 3 billion euros in private investment. So that's a really good statement in favour of, that Europe means business when it comes to social enterprise. And then there was another very significant development on just a couple of weeks ago, on the 22nd of November. The Commission adopted a communication, but it's a policy document, for the Startup and Scale-Up Initiative. And if you're not aware of it, so the researchers here, you should look it up. And it's about, and there's a section there on social economy and social enterprises. So this is for us, we think this is a very good development. It's a very visible statement. The starting point for the document is that in the past there was evidence that Europe lacked entrepreneurs compared to the United States. That the data suggests that is no longer the issue. The issue is the number that scale up and grow. And the reason this is a missed opportunity is that there's a growing body of evidence that shows that most jobs are created in micro enterprises and in young micro enterprises within the first 5 years. So the whole document is about, the whole strategy is about trying to help improve the conditions in Europe for all startups not all startups should scale up and grow, of course, but the ones that have the potential and the vocation to be able to do so. And we think it's good that there's a specific recognition for social economy and social enterprises because of the double bottom line that we know, which we believe merits specific attention and support. So those are two important developments in this last year. So now, if I just say some words on the 3 areas of action that we're focusing on which started with the Social Business Initiative, but which we're continuing now, because this is not a short-term endeavour. This is something that needs a medium and long-term investment. So access to finance. So what was interesting here is I think hopefully, I think that Europe is responding to some of the challenges that I heard discussed today. So we recognise that there's a big problem on both the supply and demand side of finance in Europe. Of course, the European Union is very diverse. The situation in countries is very different. So in the UK, things are relatively developed. In some countries, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, they're very, very embryonic, if non-existent in some cases. So we appreciate that social enterprises have special needs due to the double bottom line, and that traditional financial institutions don't tend to understand them. There's a perception that they're more risky. And then there's the danger of mission drift if you go to mainstream investors, et cetera, and that was raised. So, in 2010, the EU had already developed support for microfinance. So this is a South-North innovation. But the amounts there only went up to 25,000 euros. And we learned from that wasn't addressing the needs of social enterprises. And all our kind of independent research and market testing showed that there was a real market failure or gap in the range of funding needs below 500,000 euros. Of course, the amounts vary from country to country and the costs of living, but this has been confirmed time and time again. And so the point is you can't scale up if you don't start up. So this is really, the big market failure, and this is the niche we've decided to address through the program I'm responsible for. But in addition, there was a recognition also that on the one hand, there was a need for loans, but also that there's a need for patient capital for the social enterprises that need more time to get predictable revenues, and that there's very little provision of equity for these kind of companies across Europe. And another finding is also the need for hybrid funding that there will be, and this was touched upon as well. The need for social enterprises may need different types of funding at different stages of their development. It may start with NGOs, may need grants at the beginning, and then this can evolve. So we recognise that those challenges. And on the other hand, so that's the supply side. On the other hand, we also recognise that there are problems on the demand side, the investment readiness of social enterprises, and the need for non-financial support. So what are we doing? well, we're trying to take a holistic approach, and we understand that there's a whole ecosystem that needs to be developed. We can't develop everything at the same speed, but we recognize that that's the challenge. And so first of all, we have this program that is providing funding, and there are various kind of instruments as part of that. So the first kind is trying to boost finance, which will really end up reaching social enterprises directly to start up and scale up. So the first instrument is what's called a capped guarantee. Basically, we're sharing the risk with financial institutions that decide to develop portfolios of lending to social enterprises. And this started in summer 2015, so it's all quite new still, not that well known. And we don't manage it directly. It's implemented for us by the European Investment Fund, which has a lot of experience of financial instruments, as they're called. And what happens is that they publish a call. National financial intermediaries respond to the call and explain why that they want to develop a portfolio of lending. Then the EIF does due diligence to check that what they're really developing, they want to develop something additional. The idea shouldn't be for EU money to replace something that is already happening at national level. And then afterwards, these companies will go at the national level to these intermediaries to get loans, and it's supposed to be very market driven. So it's not like a grant where you have one deadline a year, the company can go in at any time, etc. Now we've signed about 6 deals in 5 different countries, and more are coming. I think in total there's about there's 5 more in the pipeline, and then there's, we think, 13 more intermediaries across Europe that are interested. And then we published another set of instruments, social impact instruments, as we're calling them, equity instruments. And these calls were published by the European Investment Fund. Again, it's the European Investment Fund managing this for us. These were published in October this year, so they're really very new. And there are 3 instruments here, which I think are of interest. The first is investments in funds, either co-investments in incubators, accelerators, and funds providing incubation services. So this is equity or quasi-equity, because we know that the legal form in some countries means that they can't necessarily, equity may not be an option. But the idea is to try to prioritize funds that are providing these kind of non-financial services as well. Now, the second kind of instrument is co-investments into business angels, or social business angels, as we call them for short. So, and both these instruments are supposed to be to promising or innovative startups that are seeking to start up and scale up. And then finally, there's also a pilot payment by results scheme, or social impact bond scheme, as the terminology is in some is often the social impact bond terminology is often used. So those are 3 new equity instruments. I won't go into more detail because there isn't time. Then the second set of instruments are about developing, shall I say, the landscape of financial intermediaries that are lending to social enterprises. So in particular, the capacity of non-bank financial intermediaries. So here these already existed in the past for our microfinance providers. So there's one kind which will basically provide liquidity to intermediaries, to non-banks, to boost their capacity to lend to social enterprises. And that should start in the beginning of next year. And then the other one is more is small equity investments, again into non-bank financial intermediaries, to help them with things like, these can be greenfield financial institutions, to help them set up with their infrastructure, modernization, staff training, etc. So, and this should come online at the very beginning of next year. And then I'd say the third category of support is that we're trying to help entirely new actors to emerge on both the supply and demand side. So this is through grants that we manage directly in my unit, if I can also call it this kind of soft infrastructure. So, for example, in 2013 to 2015, we ran 20 pilots in 15 countries, which helped to trigger new financial institutions that are now in our guarantee pipeline. And this year, we're just closing a call for proposals, so again for grants, again, where we're trying to develop the supply side in countries where it's underdeveloped, so to trigger new partnerships or to create new funds. And there's also a strand on hybrid finance to try to roll out this model more widely. And there was also a couple of strands on the investment readiness side, so to develop this side of things in countries. And in addition, there was also a strand to set up a European platform for social enterprise support organizations. So several speakers stressed the importance of the support organizations. And what we see is we see there's no European network for these kind of organizations to connect and to develop. There is a network on the supply side, the European Venture Philanthropy Association, and we give an operating grant to them. But we wanted to try and trigger the development, incentivize the development of a new European platform. And then if we can get something, well, we're awarding a grant. We hope that we can put it onto a more sustainable funding footing. Because if we don't provide a funding for something like this, there's no obvious other evident actor. And this is something where it's often underestimated, but European money, sometimes small amounts of money, can really trigger significant developments. There have been other networks which were triggered like this, but that really do valuable networking, capacity building work, helping organizations within their network learn from each other and therefore to speed up change. So as I mentioned, we also provide at the moment an operating grant to the European Venture Philanthropy Association, also to a European network which represents work integration enterprises, and to 2 European networks supporting microfinance. Then the European Social Fund also provides funds for local investment. There's about €1 billion set aside for this 7-year funding period for social economy and social entrepreneurship. This is dispersed through national operational programs. It's managed nationally, and this can be a mixture of things. Quite often there's a lot of grants involved there. There's also, we also developed further to the Social Business Initiative a label, a European Union Social Entrepreneurship Fund label. It's been revised because it proved to be a bit cumbersome and complex, so we're trying to simplify it. But the idea was to provide a label to funds that are investing significantly in social enterprises to make it easy for investors to make investment choices if they're interested in ethical investments and impact investment. So sorry to be a bit long there, but I hope that gives you a picture that we're actually trying to do quite a lot. I realise it's not well known about, but it's because it's just some of the things have just come online and the others are going to come online. So I'll try and be more brief on the next. There's a clock over there. I've run over already. So the second set of things was on framework conditions. So it's one thing to provide money, of course, to these companies, but it's, as we know for any company, the general environment in which you operate administratively in terms of regulation makes a big difference to your success or not. And we realize that from a European perspective, there are more and more policymakers realizing the job creation potential of social enterprises, as well as the social inclusion benefits and the sustainable development benefits. But they often lack an understanding of, well, I want to do something more, how do I do it? And this is where the European Union has a role to play in helping we're not there to create the legal frameworks. These have to happen at national level. But we can help member states by improving the evidence base, improving the also knowledge of what works, and bringing people together across borders. And we can help accelerate change. And I can say that there's a real appetite for this. So the first thing we did was to launch the first mapping study in 2014. It was the first mapping of the different national ecosystems for supporting social enterprises. And what we saw, this was an unintended consequence, was that it helped to trigger changes at the national level. And that I thought was very fascinating as a political scientist, the unintended consequences sometimes of something that's not legislation, it's not imposed, but just by providing information how you can drive change. And so we realized things are happening so fast and there were inaccuracies in the first one that we needed to update it. So we've updated 7 countries this year. and as well as the general European chapter. They're available online. And then we're going to update all the rest of the countries in the next year or so. But basically, the general trend is it confirmed there's more social enterprises and they're in more sectors, but they still face the challenges we know. We're also about to publish very soon a compendium. It's prepared with the OECD on good practices to promote social enterprises in countries. So it's on social enterprise policies. So hopefully this will also help public authorities learn in designing their own policies. We've also done a couple of policy briefs with the OECD. One is on scaling up social enterprises, and you were involved in. Ultimika, you were involved in the Marita, you were involved in the workshop, and also on measuring social impact. We're about to publish 2 country reviews, in-depth country reviews on Croatia and the Czech Republic, and we're going to do 4 more, so we can really help countries develop their understanding of where they are and where they want to go. And we've also run and will continue to run capacity building seminars where we bring national officials together to help them learn from each other. Again, I don't have time now to say anything, but one thing we also want to explore is doing more in the context of synergies with the education field. The EU published a skills agenda in June. Entrepreneurship education is very prominent in it. I mean, the EU has been supporting entrepreneurship education already for 10 years, but we want to do more. Don't have time to go into it, but I'm very keen to see what more we can do to use to promote projects, to make use of the programs that exist already, Erasmus Plus or Erasmus for Young Entrepreneurs, to raise awareness among the social enterprise community that there's money there already. And I'm deeply convinced that if you can bring awareness of social enterprises to young people when they're still in school, that it will increase the number of youngsters that want to become entrepreneurs in general. I'm personally convinced of that. And then finally, we also are doing some work, it's still quite embryonic, on access to markets. There's some work on cooperatives, on the transfer of businesses. We're also increasingly interested in synergies with mainstream companies and how to tap into the value chains and supply chains of mainstream companies. And I think there's an example, I think there have been some examples mentioned today. And there's a study that's been launched on this theme that's trying to identify good policy practice again. And then there'll be some seminars, I think, and conferences. Then also there are these various things around social innovation, which I think is a potential. They weren't designed for this, but I think they could be a source of ideas that can be replicated. So the social innovation competition, the new social innovation challenge platform. And at DG Employment, there's an online tool on ICT-enabled social innovation. So it's more around social innovation in social services, but that's something we need to start to publicise. And then finally, but very importantly, we're also going to be doing more work around the issue of public procurement and social considerations, which again was mentioned. We know it's challenging, but the Public Procurement EU directive was revised in 2014, and it increases the opportunities for social considerations. Member states were supposed to implement it by April this year. The majority still haven't done so. Now, countries aren't obliged to create these openings for social considerations, but we're going to be very interested in following who has included them, and then also in helping countries to learn from each other how they've done it, because there are 2 challenges for policymakers in reality. One is to realise that you have this opportunity, that you can make use of it. And the second is that if you do realise and you're aware, how do you do it? It's not so simple. So again, there can be a European added value from helping that process. We know it's a long-term thing, but public procurement is 14% of EU GDP. So we know also that there's a whole challenge of the size of contracts and this kind of thing, but some countries are tackling it through breaking up contracts, etc., etc. So we think it's something that we need to look at. So I think I've spoken over, but I hope I've managed to convey that we're doing a lot. Realise it's not very known about because some of it is actually still quite new. It's a long-term endeavour. Very happy to reach out to networks like yours. We're all it's all evolving, isn't it? I mean, it was interesting to hear just how recent the whole research world is as well. And we look forward to working in partnership and to developing the depth and range of also the kind of social enterprise networks. And so we're really in a period of launching and now consolidating and learning, and we want to listen to all stakeholders, including the academic community, as to have we got it right? Are we missing something? Can we improve something? Because at the end of the day, we're here to provide solutions to problems that need a European solution, but it has to make sense, it has to be relevant, it has to be valid, and we can only achieve that if we work in dialogue and in partnership with people on the ground. So thank you.
Thank you.